Good afternoon, everyone. Today we discuss about the Constitution after martial law. The nature of martial law. When we speak of history, we still tend to think of a narrative events, but it is fascinating to also consider a history of ideas. The development of ideas as a narrative too. Ideas have a story. For instance, consider the legal concept of martial rule. We say that a republic is governed by the rule of law. This means a government of laws, not of men. The rule of law requires our public officers to act within the limits of their legal authority. This means being subject to constitutional principles and restraints that preclude the arbitrary exercise of power. It is cornerstone of our constitutional system of government. Yet surviving within the very constitution on which our faith in the rule of law is founded is a remarkable relic of power, which seems to challenge the supremacy of law. This power is martial law or martial rule. Our story has made us take a part of the natural legal order. As almost of granted the President's power to place the Philippines or any part of under martial rule. It is a power which we have bound together with the President's military power. We have retained it in every iteration of our Constitution. But it is many ways a power so consistent with our system to separate unbalanced branches of government as to make its persistence striking. Because although the role of law limits the normal exercise of government power through a code of written law, under a regime of martial law, the scope of that power exercise is not fixed and not written down. It is limited only by necessity. Under our Constitution, the President can impose martial law on the ground, invasion or rebellion when public safety requires it. Martial law, therefore, is it to be invoked in those cases where the very existence of the state is threatened. For example, in the time of the Marawi siege, daghan na kayo og mga rebellion mo tong gi impose ni President Duterte ang martial law. So wala na mabuhat ang mga tao dito dili masunod na sa gobyerno. Kay ang power na naman sa mga militar. It is premised upon the principle that the state has right to defend itself, and rests on the proposition that every state possesses the power of self-preservation. Martial law has been characterized as a public right of self-defense against a danger to the order of the existence of the state. Consider this with the words of the scholar Karl Jaspers. We too easily forget the fundamental reality of force, although it is present to us daily, even though covertly. Force is inescapable. There is no human existence without the reality of force. The reality of force is something we should never forget when speaking of martial law. It is no mere parade when military power is called on and when martial law is invoked. When the president exercises power under martial law, when he calls on the men with the rifles and on the tanks, those rifles have bullets inside them and those tanks have explosive shells. Violence and physical restraints are part of parcel of the power that can be called upon. So, ang presidente gid ang pinakagahi kay pag kuan na siya martial law, under na tanan pwede niya suguon ang mga sundalog paghirab sa asa. So mga lugar nga daghan og mga violente nga mga tawo. The 1935 Constitution provision on martial law only read that in case of invasion, insurrection or rebellion or imminent danger thereof, when the public safety requires it, he may suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. or place the Philippines or any part thereof under martial law. And it was under these provisions that President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law through Proclamation number 1081 on September 21, 1972. Thereafter, President Marcos removed from the civilian courts their authority to decide upon certain crimes and transferred jurisdiction over these crimes to military tribunals he himself had created. So gahi kaya tong presidente sa nano kay na mando magid niya nga mag-martial law yun. Martial law was not formally lifted until January 17, 1981. Through Proclamation number 2045, legal scholars have strongly contended that it continued even beyond that because President Marcos had by then also acquired legislative powers, and at its heart, martial law is the concentration of government powers in the hands of the executive. Following the 1986 EDSA Revolution, a new constitution was put in place. The 1987 Constitution retains the grant of the power to declare martial law with the President, but it narrows the grounds for its imposition and gives to both Congress and to the Supreme Court the power to review and revoke the President's proclamation. The President's power to declare martial law is now found in Section 18 of Article 7 of our 1987 Constitution. There, the Constitution states that, in case of invasion or rebellion when the public safety requires it, he may, for a period not exceeding 60 days, suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus or place the Philippines or any part thereof under martial law. So naagi dahay power ang presidente nga mag-impose og martial law within 60 days. Di siya pwede mo lapas. Tama na siya 60 days. Dapat mahuman na gid ang gera before 60 days. From the outset, therefore, the power to declare martial law is hemmed about with restrictions and limitations. There are conditions which must be met before it can be imposed. Now, the power is given to the President only when those conditions of actual invasion or rebellion, not merely imminent danger thereof, are met, and only when public safety requires it. What is more, the President can only impose martial law. For a period of up to 60 days, martial law can only extend beyond those 60 days by the joint vote of Congress. Congress voting jointly now has the authority to revoke the President's proclamation of martial law. So, pwede din nato i-extend ang martial law depende ra sa boto pod sa Congress o moagi des Congress. Under our present Constitution, the President has the duty within 48 hours of his proclamation of martial law to submit to Congress a report on his proclamation in person or in writing. For its part, Congress has the duty to convene within 24 hours following the proclamation and to deliberate on the proclamation. Congress will then decide on whether or not to revoke the proclamation and lift martial law. Also, under our Constitution, the Supreme Court is given unquestioned authority to review the sufficiency of the factual basis of the proclamation of martial law. Where the Marcos-era Supreme Court shield away from asserting authority to strike down the President's proclamation, under the 1987 Constitution, the Supreme Court is now given the express mandate to review such a proclamation. This means that the Supreme Court has the power to determine that there was insufficient factual basis for martial law and strike it down. The Supreme Court can rule that there is no actual invasion or rebellion or the public safety does not require martial law. Any citizen can file a case against the President's declaration of martial law. So, kung walay mga kaning mga setawa kaning walay mga mga rebellion o dili na siya kinahanglan, dili gid basta-basta og patupad og martial law kay pwede man kasuhan ang president sa mga taong bayan. To ensure that the question is resolved quickly, the Constitution requires that the Supreme Court must promulgate its decision within 30 days from the filing of the case. So, kinahanglan before 30 days, mag-decide na ang President. In rejection of the practices and case law that developed around Marcos-era martial law, the 1987 Constitution provides that a state of martial law does not suspend the operation of the Constitution, nor supplant the operation of the courts or of the legislature, nor deprive the courts of jurisdiction. We find here not only a rejection of the Marcos meaning of martial law but a deliberate echo of the language of the Supreme Court of the United States ruling in Ex parte Milligan. There has been only one stance since the ratification of the 1987 Constitution, when the new martial law provisions were put to the test. On the morning of November 23, 2009, a convoy of 6 vehicles carrying about 60 people was on its way to register Ismael Magundadato's candidacy for governor of Maguindanao Province. Many of these people were journalists as well as the female relatives of Magundadato. The convoy was intercepted in the town of Ampatuan by about 100 armed men, reported led by Dato Unsay, Mayor Dato Andal Ampatuan Jr., and the Police Chief Inspector and concurrent PNP Deputy Provincial Director of the Maguindanao Police Provincial Office. The intercepted passengers were killed under mutilated bodies bearing the marks of torture, were soon found among mass graves in Ampatuan town. On November 24, 2009, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo issued Proclamation No. 1946 declaring a state of emergency in the province of Maguindanao, Sultan Kudarat, and the city of Cotabato, and calling out the armed forces of the Philippines to assist in the restoration and maintenance of peace and order in the affected areas. Mayor Andal Ampatuan Jr. was taken in custody on November 26, 2009, and criminal charges for multiple murder were filed against him. So, na mga example laning anong na mga kuan mag-impose yung martial law kay daghan yung mga tao nga di mo tuog balaod. It must also be said that during this time there were protestations that President Arroyo had resorted to martial law for self-serving political reasons. Okay, gigambit naman ang uban magprotesta yet kay gamito naman lang kagalingong power. In the meantime, the executive and the military continued to act under the aegis of martial law, making seizures of more weaponry and stockpiles and conducting warrantless searches and arrests. But before Congress could come to a vote over the present proclamation, the President herself lifted martial law in Maguindanao on December 12, 2009. Congress consequently adjourned its special session on the ground that the issue had become most unacademic. The 1987 Constitution after martial law. The 1987 Constitution is the utmost symbol of Philippine statehood. It is the central institution in our political system. However, given the ignorance and indifference to our Constitution, they unraveled by my informal survey, it appears that the democratic principles and the noble and lofty ideals enshrined in this sublime document are not yet properly installed in our hearts and minds. Of course, there are other more telling proofs which actually show that the constitutional spirit has yet to be infused in our political consciousness. And the most disheartening of these examples is the unrelenting hold of political dynasties in our political life. Section 26 of Article 2 provides the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law. Pero karon kay ginagamit naman natong mga ngalan, so naagi hapon ang political dynasty. Hindi na mawala. Kay siyempre ang mga tao karon gusto man gid nga mahimo yung power, power gid kay power. So di gid nabuy-an ang gobyerno. Ay naa sa gobyerno ang dako nga opportunity. So padayon ang political dynasty dinagi na sa mawala sa atoa. Why is the 1987 Constitution important? It is important because it is the utmost symbol of Philippine statehood. It is the central institution of our political system. Section 26 of Article 2 provides, the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law. So may purpose sa 1987 Constitution. 1987 Constitution is, its goal is to secure the sovereignty of the state and the integrity of the national territory. Section 4. The prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people. Okay, naadiana din na butang no? Protect the people gyud. Una importante sa tanan. Constitutional authoritarianism. What is constitutional authoritarianism? Okay. From the pen of the late Supreme Court, Justice Roberto Martin followed the term constitutional authoritarianism. He was a student when he wrote it and in the experience of his youth. He had difficulty understanding the theory that alone in accepting its legal consequences. Justin Martin deciding a bunch of related cases in the Supreme Court about 3 decades ago. He defines that the theory of the authority of the President Ferdinand Marcos to propose amendments to the Constitution or to assume the power of Constituent Assembly. Justin Martin thus effectively answered all those who sought to challenge, as without a foundation in the fundamental law, a bevy of constitutional amendments written by the APO. The fact had to be considered due that when Marcos drafted the proposed charter changes, there was no functioning legislature. And let me hasten to add, it happened during martial law when presidential decrees were deemed at par with legislative enactments. In addition to the fact that there was yet no National Assembly convened at the time, one proposal was from the viewpoint of people holding government positions. Most difficult to refuse, it was well high impossible for them not to bite the bait. Generally speaking, no politician would turn down an offer to continue in power. More so if that was achieved without going through the expensive process called election. As Marcos wrote it, concerned elected officials shall continue as presently constituted XXX. In other words, those holding elective offices. If the Marcos proposals got the people's nod in a referendum, would remain in power. As he cast the scenario, most of, if not all officials supported the amendments. I happen to recollect Justice Martin's phrase in the light of the current noise generated by the Consultative Commission of Her Excellency, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Presently, so much brouhaha is heaped upon the work of President Arroyo's CONCOM, the loudest din of which has seemingly nothing to do with substance. The uproar dwells on the suggestion that our officials take a base, so to speak, save for a few rara aves who, either out of genuine confidence or for show, desires for a democratic mandate. Our elected leaders throughout the lands are agog on the Noel proposal. In much the same frenzied way their counterparts salivated when Marcos dangled before their lustful eyes, the devious scheme to extend their hold of government seats. History is not quite repeated, though when Marcos proposed some amendments to the Constitution, our country was in crisis. Only the presidency was dynamic. Naturally, the constitutional method of proposing amendments could not be availed. He took it upon himself to write the proposed changes and set the mechanism of their submission to the people. The president's situation is different. It was bad enough to have a dictator who could not act normally in a crisis. It is worse to have a president in a normal situation act as if we were in a crisis by assembling the consultative commission purportedly to suggest amendments to the Constitution. Admittedly, many CONCOM members are nationalistic, but no matter their patriotism, it cannot escape conclusion that their collective product is as if written by the hand of President Arroyo herself. In the ensuing days, we shall witness the concerted effort of Malacanang, okay, Malakasang, and friends escalate. Their strategy is to canalize the thought of our people away from the Noel garbage. They will focus in making us believe that the presidential system allows such events as Josepidal, Hello Garcia, and the fertilizer scam to take place under the orchestration of the palace. Spin doctors will condition our minds into thinking that when our present officials remain in power under a parliamentary system, they will suddenly become most honest and incorrupt. This was the 1973 constitutional authoritarianism. 1973 constitutional authoritarianism has many parts. So, muna bahala mag-zoom kaya di kasi maklaro. In 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president. In 1967, Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. Marcos won the re-election in 1969 in a bid boosted by campaign overspending and the use of government funds. So, election of delegates, November 20, 1970. Convention started formally on June 1, 1971 with former President Carlos Garcia, who died when former President Carlos Garcia died, then Diosdado Macapagal is the next president. Martial law was declared, communist insurgency, delegates were placed behind the bars and others had voluntary exile. So Marcos dictated some provisions of the Constitution manipulating the document. On November 29, 1972, proposed Constitution was approved. Parliamentary government is the legislative power was vested in a cameral National Assembly. The President, elected as the symbolic and ceremonial head of state, will serve for 6 years and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Prime Minister, executive power, Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces. Presidential Decree Number 73, setting the date of the plebiscite, ratify or reject the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. Citizen assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973, voting by hand. On January 17, 1973, issued a proclamation wherein the Constitution had been ratified by the overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular citizen assemblies. 1976, citizen assemblies decided to allow the continuation of martial law and following amendments. Interim Batasang Pambansa to substitute for Interim National Assembly, the President to become the Prime Minister. Martial law was left for emergency basis. 1980, 1981, 1984, retirement age of the members of judiciary was extended to 70 years. Grabe kagahi na. Parliamentary to French style, executive power to the President, executive committee well created, Prime Minister and 14 others and serve as the President's cabinet. Some electoral reform was instituted. The executive committee was abolished and the Vice President was restored. The 1973 Constitution, way for President to keep executive powers, abolished the Senate, never acted as parliamentary system but an authoritarian presidential system. 1980 situation had been very turbulent. As Marcos amassed power, discontent has also been bargaining. In August 1983, Benigno came over. Most credible alternative was assassinated after his exile from US. So, gawas na din ang EDSA People Power Revolution. And that's all. Thank you and God bless.